Alright, we should be live. All right.
Holy cow.
It sounds like we got a little echo. Do you have your audio on, Eleanor?
Yeah, I don't hear an echo on my end.
Okay, cool. All right, it went away. Sweet.
Oh, man, I kind
All
of like
right.
that.
This is episode 37 of ACAB Radio. We're your hosts, Jay Lyfer, Kelly Special K Patterson, and King Ron. And we have a very special guest today, Eleanor Goldfield. Hello, Eleanor.
Hi.
How you doing?
I'm hanging in there. How about you guys?
Yep.
Same. Yep, same. Yeah, that was a pretty kick-ass song. When did you guys put that out?
So the band no longer exists. It's been relegated to the beautiful, in that sort of cliche Hollywood way. The song was actually not the band directly. That song was the band with a guest rapper named Tim Almeida, who has a band called the Native Alien Tribe.
Mm-hmm.
But that song I want to say is like 5 years old. So yeah, around 5 years. But it's one of those, like a political rock band. It never really really goes out of style because things are just as. Can I curse?
Sure can.
Oh yeah.
We encourage.
Please do it.
Cool. I always like to ask before I just say things are really fucked up, and then someone looks at me horrified. Yeah, so with political music, as with political commentary, it has good staying power because things can continue to be fucked up. So.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's actually like when you watch movies that are like based in the '60s and you see the same shit. Like it's always fucked up and it continues.
Right.
The names may change.
I just rewatched Network, and it's amazing like how prophetic that movie is.
Yeah.
And if you think about how old it is and how that's exactly the reality we live in, and they almost made it as like a parody of a reality that could be, and you're like, oh no, that's just what it is now.
Right. It's kind of like Idiocracy, how it's like become. That's how I see like politics now. It's crazy.
Yeah, we always talk about They Live.
Yeah, that's another
prophetic.
one.
Yeah,
for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just trying to share this out
Yep.
into a few.
They
more
Live
groups.
is basically a documentary at this point.
Right. 1984 too, right?
I did like the use of clowns in the video and the protests where people use clowns. I think we should have like 3,000 clowns out there. That'd be good.
I'm sorry.
Just on
Yeah, I
standby.
couldn't get behind that. I really appreciate the anti-fascist clowns, but they scare the shit out of me because I'm not really afraid of almost anything, but I am deathly afraid.
Yeah, well, that could backfire because everybody's scared of clowns, but I think that's one of their strengths is people are afraid of clowns.
Unfortunately, there is a shortage of clowns. I just posted an article recently that the majority of clowns, have taken government jobs. So,
yeah, that's how.
Nice. All right. So let's get into it here. First of all, I want to give a shout out to Arnold Abbott. Rest in power, brother.
absolutely.
Arnold Abbott was a homeless advocate, did a lot of outreach, sharing food with folks in Florida. For those of you not familiar with this story, I'm going to play a brief clip. It's about a minute or two long here.
This week, South Florida lost a bit of its heart and soul. A man with principle and selfless purpose. A man who simply fed the hungry and then defied the laws trying to stop him and won. Arnold Abbott passed this week at 94 years old. Until the end, the gourmet chef to those who, but for him, might have gone without eating. He'd been feeding the hungry for decades before he and his foundation, Love Thy Neighbor, bubbled up into the headlines 5 years ago in a simmering dispute with Fort Lauderdale. The city had passed laws to corral and regulate feedings in public, and in a disgraceful display, even handcuffed Abbott during a feeding on the beach, dumped his food in front of those he was working to help. Take a listen to what he told us right here at this table just after his arrest.
It is the most gorgeous place for them to take their plates and sit on the benches right by the beach and enjoy the same comforts that anybody else wants to when they come to enjoy a day at the beach.
With all the focus on the fight with City Hall, few watching this gentle gray-haired chef could know how well-founded he was in the fight for justice. He is an Army vet. He fought in World War II, awarded Purple Hearts twice. He was in Mississippi in the 60s, putting his own safety on the line to help African Americans register to vote. Abbott leaves a legacy that defines the kind of civil disobedience Dr. Martin Luther King worked for, a peaceful yet powerful defiance that ends unjust law. Rest in peace, Jeff.
Definitely an inspiration.
For sure.
I mean, I take a lot of inspiration because I'm getting older, and it's getting tougher as I get older. But you know, this gentleman, 94, so hopefully I have as many years left as he did,
Right.
in order to continue on. And I have no excuses to get tired. You know, if this gentleman can do it at that advanced age, there's no excuses left for any of us not to get involved at any age now.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, and it shows you the heartlessness of people that don't want you feeding homeless people and don't want you sharing. So because the guy's 90. Well, I mean, I guess he was about 90 at the time. So,
Right.
And they're
Handcuffing him?
arresting him and handcuffing him and then just throwing away food that people need.
Hungry people standing right there, and they just threw it away. Yeah, that was crazy.
And it's funny because when I was on the NPR show, you know, one of the things that Kathleen, who's one of the worst of the worst, you know, one of
She's phony as
we
can
want to
be.
change the narrative so it's not homeless. It's not the neighbors against homeless people. And I was like, well, you created that narrative. You know? You guys are the ones through your behavior that
Right,
they
through
created
action.
that narrative of neighbors versus the homeless.
As well as their words, and the Next Door Neighbor app,
Yeah.
you know, gave them a
And-
platform to promote
And
their
on
hatred.
top of that, there's like a dozen vocal people trying to represent the entire neighborhood. You know, and they don't bring up the people in the neighborhood who come out and join us on
and
Sundays.
promote us, and that's right.
Or derive food from us and share and instead of having to worry about whether they're going to pay their power bill or
Buy
eat,
medicine that
then
month. Yep.
they can concentrate on what they need to concentrate on.
All right. Absolutely. Definitely a good dude. We need more people like him. Another story I wanted to talk about was the, hope I'm saying this right, Ukwasusne in so-called Canada. There was a protest because they went in and the government raided 2 dispensaries, I believe. And I don't know, they've been under attack for a while now. And it's just the same old fight that goes on between the Canadian government. The Canadian government gave authority to what they call the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne, and there's more traditional way of doing things, the Indian Way Longhouse, which is like leaders of community clans and hereditary chiefs, and they don't acknowledge the authority of the Mohawk Council, so they issued themselves a license and started selling medical marijuana, and I believe recreational as well. And the police there ended up raiding them, arresting some people. So in their eyes, these are political prisoners. They went and held a protest outside of the police station there, and things got pretty heavy pretty quickly, and long story short, they ended up like stealing a police cruiser and taking it and setting it on fire. So here's a brief clip of that. It's like a
You don't
minute.
see that often enough.
Right. It's like a minute long.
I don't know if Ronnie J is going to come out here for this.
Perhaps it was because they were cold.
Yeah, it is cold up there.
It is.
2 seconds.
The train's like, let's get the fuck out of here.
Oh shit! Fucking bullets! We're gonna get shot. We gotta go.
I guess
Fucking
they were in the
bullets
trunk.
that motherfucker.
Yep.
Yeah!
You got to empty the trunk before you do this.
We're gonna get killed. Cops are shooting at us. We gotta go.
Yeah, this struggle is nothing new.
It's real.
We were yeah, the struggle's real. Eleanor, we were talking just a minute ago about the Wet'suwet'en. Am I saying that right? They have the same Wet'suwet'en, yeah. With the pipeline, they have the same struggle, right? Where there's a council set up and they have their hereditary chiefs, and there's a problem with respecting authority, right?
I mean, I don't. Yeah, it sounds similar in terms of the fact that Canada has set up these councils due to their Indian Act that basically says that these councils are basically the governmental aspect of the Indigenous, but that at the same time they say that Canada wants to respect the laws and traditions of the Indigenous peoples, but those two are mutually exclusive because, as you noted, and I'm not familiar with this story that you mentioned, but the Wet'suwet'en have hereditary chiefs, and they do not recognize the council. So, based on Indigenous sovereignty, the hereditary chiefs have the final say. And what happened with the Wet'suwet'en is that the hereditary chiefs said absolutely no pipeline, won't happen. But the council, the Canadian government then told the pipeline company, go to ask the council if they'll accept the pipeline. And of course, they bring wads of cash into a community that is impoverished and marginalized, and they say, hey, would you be willing to okay the pipeline? The council okays the pipeline. The council that doesn't actually have any power that had already said no to. And so what you have now is there's video of this as well. The Royal Canadian Police raided the Wet'suwet'en lands and basically are forcing this pipeline through at the same time that Canada has, and Trudeau, which is like the Prince Charming face on neoliberalism and capitalism, has basically said that he wants to reconcile with the Indigenous people of Canada. And obviously that's bullshit, because you can't reconcile with people if you're shoving dirty energy projects in through their sovereign lands, or in this case, if you're arresting them for growing a plant. That, by the way, has a long, rich Indigenous history.
Right. It seems that they're putting in puppet governments, the Canadians, on the Indigenous people, and as well. Trudeau does have a huge, media presence and a huge propaganda machine. A lot of the stuff that we see here does paint him as, some sort of really nice guy, really caring. He's very charismatic. And yet the truth comes out when you see these articles and these stories. But unfortunately, a lot of people are fooled by him.
Yeah, it's similar to Obama. He was an eloquent and good-looking face on neoliberalism, as Cornel West said that he's the black poster child of Wall Street, and it's the same thing with Trudeau. He looks nice. I mean, he's not my type, but he looks nice, and he's the Prince Charming face on a perpetuation of colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism.
Conan Patrick had a comment here, said that they bypassed elders, set up government, and gave consent without elders or people having say. Yep, absolutely. We covered the Wet'suwet'en when that happened as well. We played a clip on our past show. If you haven't seen that, I forget which episode, but we went into that. And I've been following it since. And since then, Trudeau did like a town hall discussion. And I was just discussing, basically saying what you said, how he's wants to respect Indigenous rights. And, there's the UN... something with the UN article, something that they and they're basically
Indigenous rights.
That's right, and they're not respecting their sovereign lands at all when they're trying to force a pipeline down their throats.
Right, but the media only reports what he says. So he has that big lie going on, and he perpetuates that lie. Like every time he gets in front of the cameras, and his actions aren't the same as his words. But we should be getting used to that by now.
Yeah.
With our politicians, I mean, there's nothing new there. It's just that the people aren't awoke enough. They're not really looking. I mean, we have same with Trump, So we wish the best to the, folks.
I think with
fighting.
Trump, though, it's an interesting, it's so overt that I think a lot of people when Trump was elected were shocked, but a lot of people, particularly Black and brown and Indigenous people, were like, yeah, no, you guys were always that racist. You just didn't realize it. It's sort of like stripping that nice facade off, like Obama's gone. We can't pretend that we're that racial justice is a thing in this country. We can't pretend that women have equal rights, that immigrant communities have equal rights. And I mean, Obama was the deporter in chief. Let's not forget.
That's right. Doubled.
Right. There is that total distance between what people say and what they do, and that's why the vast majority of Americans are registered as independents. That's why trust in the government has fallen since the 1950s, like just a direct downward spike. People have absolutely little to no trust left in the government, and it's just that it's not. Sometimes that manifests, unfortunately, in apathy, in this sort of, well, what the fuck can I do about it anyway? We're screwed, as opposed to action. I think that a lot of people know that the government's not on their side, but they feel sort of like, well, why bother fighting it? And so that's where that push to activate people, I think, is the hardest, because I think not a lot of people are that asleep that they're like, no, yeah, totally, government's on my side. But it's that extra step of activating them.
Yeah, I think the thing with Trump is that it's not that he's doing so much different, that he's just being honest about it, and there's dangers to that, because it emboldens people that have that attitude, and it also drives people into the system thinking that's the only way they can fight it. But the thing about it is, we recently talked to somebody, and their take on removing TPS was that gave Trump a group of people that would be easy to deport so that he could catch up to Obama. So,
Right,
that says something, that he has to fight, or he has to, create a system that allows him to catch up to Obama.
Yeah.
In terms of deportations.
Yeah, to appeal to his base, yeah, for sure.
But push is going to have to come to shove it at some point. If we continue along this line, we're all going to be in for a much worse world of hurt here. It just can't continue, and the apathy has to, at some point, give way to action, or it's going to really be too late. And it may be at that point now. I'm not sure. I vacillate back and forth thinking that, we really will be able to get something done and accomplish something and move in the right direction. And at other times, I'm like, man, we're so fucked. We're so fucked, it's over.
I think that's how all activists and organizers feel. You volley between those two feelings. I think, the important thing is to have hope, but just going to turn out okay. And hope is based on the feeling that, I have no idea how this shit's going to turn out, but I refuse to just sit back and watch it fall apart. I'm going to do whatever I can to fight. And Huey P. Newton, co-founder of the Black Panther Party, said that, he refused to live without hope and dignity, but the only way that he could live with hope and dignity was to fight and to try and make things better for his people and his community. And I think that that's something that has to be taught. And I don't mean like in schools, but I mean like in our communities, that needs to be promoted. And I think part of that is also making things possible. I recently spoke to a psychologist that talked about how powerful rationalization can be, like the idea that people rationalize things and make them seem like they're not that bad, because our brains are hardwired to try and avoid mental trauma. And it can be very traumatic to sit there and think, oh my God, we're all going to die. And how shitty things are. So we rationalize it and say that it's not that bad. You know, we go shopping or we go have brunch or whatever the fuck people do. So, so instead of making it, and when we talk to our communities about these things, make seem possible, make it like, you know, like Saul Alinsky wrote a book called Rules for Radicals, and that's one of the things that he talks about. Make it fun, make it possible, and set goals for your community that are attainable. So instead of saying, hey, let's dismantle the military-industrial complex, say, hey, how can we address military spending in our community? You know, like Lockheed Martin has a senator that's paid off in our district, or, you know, something like that makes it attainable so that people don't burn out, and so that people like want to start engaging because they feel like it's worth it and that they can actually attain a victory.
Yeah, baby steps. I mean, you want to set a realistic goal. Don't take on the whole military industrial complex like you said. Start small, and that way you can gain a victory and, you know, boost morale and get people to want to get involved. Yeah. Makes sense for sure. Also, I wanted to say how when you said like it's kind of like Trump taking the mask off, we see that with Venezuela too, right? Not just Trump, but John Bolton. Like now they're just coming out and saying like it's all about the oil, right? And that's not something that would happen under
Bernie
Obama.
Sanders, by the way, who's all for going into Venezuela.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like just about every politician.
Bernie Sanders, is he a thing
I'm
again?
sure they're going to finance more F-35, so he's in favor of that, you know.
Oh. We know his history, you know.
Yeah.
Another guy who speaks.
Yeah, it's I mean the whole all of Congress is very pro imperialism. I mean, the Dems talked about resistance, and then as soon as they could, they voted to give Trump unlimited war powers. Thanks for your resistance, guys.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean the idea that anyone in Congress and I mean Bernie Sanders has been talking shit about Maduro, even though he has said that he doesn't want the U.S. to intervene militarily, but he's still been talking shit about Maduro, which perpetuates that concept that it's Maduro's fault that shit's bad in Venezuela, which is of course not true. So Sanders is not like he's not actually doing the right thing.
No.
And I'm not trying to shit on Sanders in particular. It's just that people want to paint him as like, oh, see, he's got it right, but he doesn't, because he could, with his platform, hey, look at what our sanctions have done in Venezuela. Look at U.S. interventionism since the Monroe Doctrine has perpetuated extreme poverty, and you know, the School of the Americas. Has Bernie Sanders ever mentioned that? You know, like there's so much missing from that analysis, and just by laying that blame at Maduro's feet doesn't help at all. It actually only eggs on. It makes the debate one of, oh, should the U.S. intervene or not? Because no matter what, Maduro's terrible. That it legitimizes that argument, as opposed to saying, what the hell are you talking about? Like, Maduro's not perfect, but that's not the issue. The issue is, fuck your imperialism. Get the fuck out of there. You have no business messing around in other countries, whether that be militarily or economically. So I think that, you know, you're not going to see that from Congress. So it's really important that people look to alternative media, you know, shows like this one to get that information, because you're never going to get it from the corporatized media or Congress, which they own.
Yeah, it's definitely a united front between left and right media, both sides of the aisle in Congress. The only one that I've seen actually speak out on it was Ilhan Omar when she confronted Elliot Abrams. Like, that was, like, when I saw that, like, it made me so happy. Yeah. Like, actually called him out. And then she, you know, caught shit for that. I mean, she catches shit for anything she says, really. But, like, when she called out AIPAC, too.
That's also an issue, is that, you know, Ilhan Omar has done a good job speaking out against injustice. I think it's important that we recognize that how our system works and doesn't work. So even if she were to become president, that still wouldn't, I mean, she could pass some executive orders or whatever, but there's our system, for better or for worse, is structured so that one person in Congress, one president even, can't make the sweeping changes necessary to really address the structure of our system. So that is something that we have to confront and that we have to grapple with, and not just look to somebody like Ilhan Omar, Bernie Sanders, Ocasio-Cortez, look at them like our savior, because that's not how we'll win. And it's also not how we'll win in terms of movements. We can't have a singular leader in a movement, because otherwise it's so easy to pick them off, and we'll die on the steps before we even get to the door.
Yeah, you can't fight the system or change the system by, participating or from within that system. Like you said, that this system is set up to sustain itself. It's not set up to change itself, right? So, yeah, I don't know what your politics are, but we're all anarchists here. We don't vote. We don't believe in rulers or politics in general. I don't see any change happen. If change could happen, it would have happened by now, right? If what people wanted really came to fruition via your representative, then it would have by now. But we just don't see that. I mean, when you see what's being passed, it's unpopular things that the people don't even want, and the things that we do want, get lost in the mass confusion for sure. There was a couple other stories, if I can pull them up real quick. Some local stuff we're going to get into later, but bear with me for a second. The other one was this Coast Guard guy. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but...
most people haven't, considering it hasn't really made a lot of news. They have been pushing a lot of other nonsense, and this gentleman has been pushed to the back.
Yeah. Speaking of Ilhan Omar, I think he wanted to kill her and a bunch of other... He was like a radical right-wing guy.
He's thinking about killing every last person on Earth.
Yeah.
I guess that includes her.
That kind of covers her,
Yeah.
So
I'm not racist. I hate everybody equally. I
am dreaming of a way.
Lieutenant?
Let's see. Let me scroll through here. I forget. I'm dreaming of a way to kill almost every last person on Earth. A self-proclaimed white nationalist planned a mass terrorist attack. Lieutenant, U.S. Coast Guard lieutenant.
Which is kind of like a glorified fucking lifeguard, but...
now.
But yeah, he had tons of stockpile of weapons and wanted to target politicians and journalists. Just crazy. I mean, it's just crazy that they try to, especially the media, paint the left as the violent enemy, you know what I mean, when it's clearly right-wing extremists that are on the rise and are responsible for most of the attacks in this country anyway.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, and if this gentleman is out there in that position, that they're seated through the military and local police forces also. He does have allies who think along, the same way that he does. This is unfortunate. But, as we find him, we talk about them. But he's not like a lone wolf out there. And that's what people kind of have to start realizing. He's not an abnormality of the system. He's becoming, more and more what the system is.
Yeah, so I'll post this article on the page for anybody who's interested. But yeah, that was a pretty crazy story. Thankfully, they were able to stop the attack before it happened. But
before he killed almost every person on Earth. At least he aims high. I'll give him credit for, having some goals,
He's shooting for the moon.
Which probably would have happened after that.
So I wanted to let our viewers know where they can find your work. I know I listened to Common Censored Act Out. So where and when do you do these shows, and where can they find you at?
So I actually just thought of something. Sorry, I'm battling a migraine today, so my brain is on a low gear. But with that previous story, I think it's interesting because one of you said like they caught him before he did anything, and of course that they is law enforcement, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's an interesting sort of dichotomy because, I mean, I believe in the abolition of police. And then people will often ask me, okay, well, what happens when you need a police officer? And my response is, I never need a police officer. What I need is perhaps some help. But that is not the job of police. Like, by definition, they were created, and I can't remember his name, but Christian something wrote a book called Our Enemies in Blue, which is an incredible book that basically dissects the history of policing in the United States and in England, actually. And basically, that it was born from slave patrol all the way up to today. But what's interesting is that if you ask somebody what they would actually need in a crisis situation, or even something like this, what you'd need is what some folks, like for instance, what they have in Rojava, which is like peacekeeping teams.
Correct.
Which just by like that name, you understand that what their job is. And also with those teams is that it's always split 50-50 men and women, which is also important. But also it changes every 6 months, I believe. So there's never this feeling of authority, which is what, of course, police get off on, that knowing that they'll get away with it because they have that entrenched, and they have a monopoly on that authority.
Yeah.
And they have a monopoly on violence. They are allowed to use violence, but no one else is. But the idea of a peacekeeper is that they try to de-escalate and diffuse a situation, and if they overstep, then they know that in 6 months somebody's going to be like, hey, now it's our turn. And so the idea is that no one feels that they can have a monopoly on that violence, on force, and on that authority. And so I think, like, in instances like this, and of course in our system, I wouldn't say to, like a victim of rape, like, oh, don't call the police. I think, unfortunately, for a lot of people in our society, they have no to call the cops in these crisis situations. So I'm not trying to shit on people who have used that, but I think it's an interesting point to think about, like, do we actually need them for these situations, or is it that responsibility to them because we have no other choice? And
Damn.
if addressed poorly, such as crisis community organizations that deal with domestic violence, that then bringing in police. So that's just, it reminded me when with that story, because people like that could just as easily be dealt with by people who aren't. It's just that our system doesn't give us that option.
Yeah.
Correct.
You were breaking up there a little bit, but we got the
that's-
gist of what you're saying.
That is one of the things is, a lot of people want to criticize, and it's, the who will build the roads kind of argument. But like, if your only option is the police, then you might have to use them. And there are certain things, like if somebody steals your car, your insurance company wants a police report, so you have to go to the police. So that is one of the things that the government does, is it eliminates your options to defend yourself and puts you in their mercy, so that you have to rely on the government or government policing for certain things.
Mm-hmm. And when people make that argument, like, well, what are you going to do if you don't have police? It's going to be chaos. Who's going to save you if somebody breaks into your home? But for the majority of these situations, that when I discuss this with people, by the time police show up, what's done is going to be done. Whether it's a home invasion, if you call the police, they're you know what I mean? If you wait around for the police to get there, you're going to be dead. You know what I mean?
It's
Or if
community involvement. Absolutely. Listen, my neighbor's next door and can come to my aid immediately. And that's what, we were talking about, is that kind of community building and, the neighbors getting together and solving and taking care of a lot of the stuff that the police do now. Some of the larger stuff, unfortunately, there's not a mechanism in place at the moment, but still, even in some of those cases, having communities standing together and dealing with predators in our communities. We can do that as a community. We don't need those outside forces to do that. I've seen it done successfully a few times so far in my existence. And I know, once you know that it can be done, it's just building upon that and getting more people involved.
Yeah, and to your point, like also like dealing with it inside the community, we also have to look at the causes. Poverty is the biggest indicator of crime, of course, because scarcity triggers violence. How could it not? So, if we dealt with poverty in a realistic way, then cut crime significantly. If we also dealt with education and mental health services, healthcare. There are people who have extreme mental health problems that have nowhere to turn, and so they're a lot of them become homeless and are forced into criminal situations because of their mental health illness and because of the situations that they find themselves in. When you push people into these situations, of course they're going to react that way. Anybody would. So yeah, the situations that perpetuate crime are also not anything that the cops can deal with.
Yeah, it's a lot bigger issue. And if we were to address those issues, then we would see some of the socioeconomic. I'm a big fan of Peter Joseph and the Zeitgeist movement, and he's got it right, when he talks about structural violence and what this system perpetuates. And if we were to address things like you said, like poverty and just mental health, if we take care of our people better instead of spending all this money, billions and trillions of dollars on war, if we kept that money here and really took care of our communities, we'd see a decrease. We'd see a decrease in crime. We'd see an increase in mental health, and all of these things, all the burdens that capitalism pretty much imposes on people.
It doesn't have to be big, though. It's on the community level. For like what we do, when we go out there and we share food with people who are hungry. They're not out there then looking to commit crimes to obtain a full belly or to get clothing because they're cold. A lot of this can be dealt with. Even the mental health on a certain level can be dealt with on a community level. I totally believe that. Certain cities, I wish I could remember what city it was. They don't send out the police. They have like a mental health crisis team that goes out, and this isn't like a city funded. This was a group that started like through community to go and address these situations, because we know what happens when the police come. It's always a crime and somebody has to get shot. And these guys are trained and they take care of the community, especially mental health crisis situations. And that was a community initiative. We could do a lot by ourselves with not a whole lot of money, but by taking those small steps that we discussed earlier. And every time you do something like that, it is a small victory, and keeps motivation up for sure.
Yeah, it takes a lot of personal responsibility. People have to step up to the plate, and the way the system's set up now, where you have to work 9 to 5. and 5 days a week, and you've got a family, it's hard. People would rather make excuses and rely on the government to do the hard work for them, and that's where the problem comes in. So yeah.
I also believe, this isn't in our nature. This is something that's kind of current. We were always taught, whether you're religious or not, am I my brother's keeper? Do we watch out, for the guy next door? And when I was growing up, we did, and now things have shifted. The narrative has shifted where we criminalize poverty and homelessness. And people are feeding into that. And, and there's a big push by a lot of religious groups, the conservative right, makes it where, they encourage that type of thinking. You're not in God's favor if you're poor, so you deserve what you get. I don't know. I still believe that, getting together, we can. At least in my community, I sometimes say, I can't change the world, but I can change my little piece of it.
Another solution I've heard to policing is more of a free market approach. Like you said, police have a monopoly on force. They're the only agency, right? Well, there's multiple law enforcement agencies, but if there were, say, a bunch of private security companies and they all provide a similar service, so if there's one that's known to be prone to violence, then there's another group that a community can, go and take their business and do it with them. Say, okay, we want to work with these people because they don't show up and shoot unarmed people all the time. You know what I mean? So, and that's kind of like the free market providing a solution. You wouldn't have to do business with these people. So we have to do business with cops because that's the only option. So if there were multiple...
Because they'll shoot you if you don't.
Yeah. If there were multiple sources, I guess.
The problem with that, though, is that it's asking capitalism to address a problem of violence, and capitalism is violence. So I know that, and this is where I'll fundamentally disagree with anybody who's pro-free market, because free market is an oxymoron. There's no such thing as a free market. A market is something that's created by humans. It's not a natural entity that just will right itself according to nature's laws, because
the
it's
invisible
not natural.
free hand.
Yeah.
The thing.
It's a man-made entity, and so the idea that competition would drive out the violent force, no. Capitalism has shown us time and time again that the violent force always wins, because there's always somebody who has more money that's willing to put that money into a violent entity. So, whether that's paramilitaries in Colombia that perpetuate the coca trade because they make any other form of agriculture completely unsustainable for farmers. There's always going to be somebody that has the money and is willing to back violence. So the idea that a free market solution could address police brutality, I wouldn't buy it for a second.
Yep.
Yeah, well, one of the flaws with that is then you get a person who has an enormous amount of money and they pay off, the private security companies to oppress people that don't have that money. And but there are examples in history where government hasn't been available and people have created their own forms. And there's an essay called "The Not So Wild Wild West," which details some of that, where people were heading west during the frontier days of the United States, and government hadn't been established and there were no police forces. And people created like cattlemen's associations, and they had, like, if there was a crime, people put together, a volunteer posse and went out and found the person who had committed those crimes. And there's issues with that also, because there's vigilantism, which can run rampant. But there are solutions outside of the government, and the thing about that is, one of the parts of that essay is how once government did make its way into the West and they started appointing, police officers and judges, a lot of times those people were actually criminals, and the crime rates went up rather than went down. And so the thing is, the government limits your ability to act as a community because they want that. And that's part of the reason that food not bombs and groups that go out and share food with the homeless have been cracked down on, is because they create an example of how you can work within your community and not be dependent on the government.
Right, we make the government
Yeah,
irrelevant.
it's the threat of a good example that they're so afraid of. And that people can fill in the gaping chasms that are left by the system. That's also scary, because then people have to confront that the system's not doing shit to help people. But yeah, like, I think that unless the people are choosing autonomously in terms of self-determination how they want to protect themselves and each other, then it's not going to work. And adding a profit motive to that will only poison that well, because then it's not about protecting people, it's about protecting that profit. And so yeah, when people can choose for themselves how to protect themselves, and you see this in the history of the U.S. too, the American Indian movement, the Black Panther Party, when people come together and say, we are protecting ourselves based on how our community works, our realities, our socio-political realities, the realities of our place and time, then that shit works. And of course they will be definitely cracked down on by the system, but the system cracks down on them because it works.
They don't want us recognizing our true power and then looking around and saying, well, what the fuck do we need them for, you know? So absolutely, it's the threat of a good example. It's funny you say that, because I recently heard Cindy Sheehan say the same thing about Venezuela. It's like they don't, and it's pretty much any socialist country, they impose these sanctions, they try to threaten with coups and everything, because they don't want a socialist country, especially one that's rich in oil, that can fund the programs that the people need. Is a threat of a good example. They don't want Venezuela to uplift its people, and then everybody see that socialism's working there, because then everybody in America is going to look around and be like, well, why don't we try that, you know? So it is a threat of a good example, I think, for sure. So I appreciate you joining us. Where can they find you? Act Out.
Yeah. So sorry, you asked that question like an hour ago, but I just went off.
I appreciate I appreciate you sticking around for sure.
So yeah, you can find me. So at my site, artkillingapathy.com, has links to my show Act Out, which airs every week on Free Speech TV. If you want to go directly to that, you can also go to freespeech.org, and that'll a whole host of the past shows. It airs, of course, online, but also on television. I do, as you mentioned, Act Out is also in podcast form. I also do a podcast with Lee Camp called Common Censored, which airs every Monday, and that along with Act Out is available on iTunes and Stitcher and all those corporate assholes that we depend on, unfortunately. And yeah, so the and other projects that I do, like spoken word and things like that, are also available on my site, artkillingapathy.com.
And I would suggest people, if you check out her work and you like it, definitely consider becoming a patron on Patreon. She is on Patreon. Also, your book, very cool. I appreciate you hooking that up. I haven't read all of it, but I did flip through it, and it's just, great stuff. Looking forward to reading that in its entirety. So thank you for that. Definitely check out her book. Again, available on her website, artkillingapathy.com. All right. Well, thank you very much, Eleanor, for joining us.
Thank you for being a voice of reason and sense. I appreciate it.
Well,
Having you here
likewise,
so much.
Appreciated chatting with you all.
All right. Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
All right. Where's it? There we go. All right. Eleanor Goldfield. Rooftop Revolutionaries, Common Censored, Act Out. definitely plug that into your browser. Check that out. She does some great stuff every week. Recent topics, a lot of the things we talked about today, she's talked about on her show. Venezuela, policing. So yeah, definitely check that out. There are some local stories that we want to get into here.
Oh boy. Here we go again. This hasn't stopped yet. I mean, we have new stories. Just never seems to end.
Right.
We always have new stories.
This is available on NV Cop Block's Facebook page. Las Vegas Metro officer faces lewdness charges. So what happened exactly with this guy? Wasn't he feeling somebody up?
This is a guy who was basically sexually assaulting the friends and wives of other officers, which is probably why he got in trouble. Because if he was out there to the the general public. But yeah, so one of the things was he was at a party and he's grabbing something, putting his hand up the skirt of I think it was a date of another police officer. And then part of the thing, though, he was the supervisor of this cop, and the woman was afraid to say anything about it.
I think that was
want
wise.
That cop to get in trouble. So the cop who was there, who's her date, was saw what was going on, but couldn't really clearly tell what was going on, and was ready to confront him, but because she didn't say anything until after they left, it didn't turn into a confrontation. And there was that one party, there was 3 different incidents where he basically did the same kind of thing.
Right. Now, didn't they, I thought her date and the woman who was assaulted also went and were seeking advice about how to deal with this, because he was also afraid of or had concerns about confronting his supervisor, because that would have put him at risk. I'm not sure which article, because I read an article also, and that seemed to be one of the gists of it, where, and who knows better what cops will do than other cops and know the danger of speaking out
And there's
against
no
the
honor
cop.
among thieves is the word, because they don't keep their exploitation to the public. Actually,
They're preying on their own.
Yeah, if
I
they're
like
the
what-
supervisor or somebody, they'll prey on that person.
Yeah.
Whether they're a cop or not.
So his name is, he was a sergeant with the LVMPD, Sergeant Michael Souter, 11-year veteran of the force. And then I looked up this dude, and apparently he received an award from the, how they like
They
to
always
reward
receive
these
awards.
fucking people,
Yeah.
but back in 2014, the not attorney general, but the attorney's office of Nevada, some huge district award he was given back in 2014. It's just
Part of the thing with that is there was a time when the cops would try to give out awards to, it was kind of like that was how they showed their support to cops that were in trouble. If cops got into a shooting, and one of the examples here is Eric Scott. The 2 of the 3 cops that murdered him that day were given awards for bravery for their actions that day. And the reason the 3rd one wasn't because he got fired because he was giving a gun to a felon.
Right.
He sold a gun to a felon. So he didn't get his award because he got fired before that. And so the thing is, they would do that. So, there's a whole section on Nevada Cop Block. If you search for award-winning cop, you come up with about 40 different stories.
Yeah.
And it's almost, a joke at this point that as soon as you see a cop who's on some kind of up for charges or under some sort of investigation, you just put his name into Google and figure out which award he got within the past couple of years.
yeah.
Right.
It's usually Policeman of the Year or some nonsense like that.
Sergeant Michael Souter. He was also, it's come out now, I saw in the Review Journal, he was an ex-coach at a local high school. I think it was Valley or Spring Valley High School. didn't say, CCSD didn't say what sport or whatever, but it doesn't matter. He was a coach at a high school, so I wouldn't be surprised if, more allegations, more victims come forward, because they already said it's could be 2, if not more. So
Yeah,
Yeah, you don't
surprised.
usually get caught on your first.
yeah,
and when you
Go
have
on.
sexual predators, they gravitate toward jobs where they can act upon those desires, such as police officers and coaches.
Right.
And
So you become a coach, and then you need more power. You become a police officer, and that now gives you more power over, or perceived power.
yeah. We got a lot of stuff here. We're not gonna be able to cover it
this
all.
is like the third cop locally since the last show that's been charged with or had some sort of sexual offense. Brett Thiel, who's
Yeah, that's the other one I'm looking for here.
he was convicted just recently. Or actually, I think he was sentenced within the past week.
Yeah, I remember he was convicted, but I didn't catch the sentence. I don't know what happened with it, but yeah,
And
Brett
those-
Thiel, he was the guy that was outside of Paddock's room.
Well, that's what got a lot of attention to the story, but also he was one of 3 cops that week, or not that week, but within a week's space that was involved in an armed standoff with other cops
Yeah.
when they went to arrest them. He's also the
Yeah.
cop who had other cops on the force looking up this girl that he had victimized, personal information.
Oh.
Fuck that.
Reconnection successful, it says. So,
All right. Are we live?
all right, I think we're back.
So by some weird coincidence, we got disconnected.
Yeah.
Crazy. So,
But so people wonder why victims of domestic violence and sexual assault by police officers don't report it, and guess who they're going to have to report it to if they do? It's those cops that were searching for her.
yeah, rather than
personal
arrest
information.
him, they help him look up the victim so they can
Right.
intimidate him.
And,
That's crazy.
Yeah, and which puts the victims of the sexual assaults, I mean, who are spouses and family members of cops, man, they know. They know this cop has friends and they hang out together. So even though it's reported, what is it, the 3 times the number of
2 to 4 times the rate of the general
public,
population.
right, and that's reported. But knowing that, his buddies are coming to get you and to back him up, you know that the numbers have got to be higher, much higher.
There's also this article here that it's not just domestic violence. It's cops using the badge to commit sex crimes. So there's been
Set them with
reports
400
done.
cops.
No, but there's that too. Yeah, last year 400 alone were arrested for rape or something like that. But this is a report that was done saying how it's at a much higher rate than the general public. Officers hiding behind the badge to commit these sex crimes because they know that they'll get away with it.
And part of the thing, sex crimes in general are lowly rated, so they're not reported at the level that they actually happen. There's a small
Right.
percentage of sexual assault cases reported, and then on top of that, the cops are a fraction of what is reported.
Yeah.
So,
Just look at all of these in the past week here. Former Philly homicide detective charged with rape and intimidation in the course of his investigations. Veteran detective Philip Nordo. Groomed and sexually assaulted witnesses while on the job as a part of a pattern of misconduct. It wasn't once or twice. It was
A pattern.
numerous people. So this is a former deputy charged with homicide. But there's
Time and
2
time.
arrested for human trafficking. These guys were part of a vice squad supervisor. Detective accused of sexually assaulting and threatening male witnesses.
Yeah, there was just another one today where a police officer was accused and is in the process of having disciplinary action, where he on Tinder went for a 13-year-old boy that he met up with and raped. He raped a 13-year-old boy. This is just current. This just came out today, and that'll be up eventually on our site.
Yeah.
But every day, countless officers are being caught, and that's not the ones that, those are the ones we know about.
Yeah.
How many out there that we don't know about? Every officer that, you come in contact with, you can look a little sideways at because
Yeah.
And the thing is, the media, even when they report it in a beneficial way, or as beneficial as they can toward police, because that story where about over 400 cops being arrested for rape, that was 400 cops arrested for forcible rape. The follow-up to that, if you read the story, is there's
It's
over
much higher.
600 that were arrested for inappropriately touching people, which is also sexual assault. So that's 1,000 cops right there that have been charged, and that's just the ones that are charged with some kind of inappropriate act toward people.
In that Washington Post article, they said it's on average 1 every 5 days. One officer gets charged with, whether it's rape or sexual assault or sexual battery, whatever. 1 every 5 days.
But so instead of reporting that there was over 1,000 cops charged with some sort of sexual assault, they only report the 400 that.
Right. They lower the numbers. They make it look like, they try to sweeten it up a bit.
And that probably doesn't include the ones that got some kind of sweetheart plea deal or.
Yeah, like this guy will probably get, former police officer pleads guilty to sex trafficking minors in Annapolis. I'm sure when we follow up on this story, he'll probably get some kind of sweetheart deal. There's just too many to talk about, folks. We talked about those. This was it's now come out that in Hawaii, the guy that they shot right by the Capitol building, state Capitol building, was a homeless man, unarmed, killed by police just the other day. And a homeless man dies in a storage unit in Chicago. This was like 30-something, I think 32nd person to die this winter in Cook County.
You could follow all these articles are on our site. You could read them, see them, really understand what's happening here and why we do what we do.
I mean, we don't share all of them on our page just because Facebook would probably shut us down for sharing too many links.
There's also not enough time in the day.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, that's so true.
San Francisco cop suspended for racist text pleads guilty to bank robbery. Hawaii sex trafficking study claims victims exploited by Honolulu police officers.
And that big thing about Robert Kraft being arrested, the owner of the New England Patriots, along with, in that sting, there was at least 3 police officers arrested.
Which we didn't hear about.
Yeah, everybody talks about Kraft, and that's what the media does. They always have the police their backs, especially when it comes to these type of cases. Austin Williams, another police officer, reported sexual assault charges. See, faces reported, so they don't want to say, "Oh, look, another rapist, cop rapist."
Well, and then they
soften up the language in the headlines. They
classify him as a former police officer. He's a former police officer because he got arrested for sexual assault.
Right. It came out and they couldn't cover it up, so they had to do something.
Yeah, he was a cop when he did it. Yeah.
I mean, what we could do is we could change the focus of the show, considering, and just deal on rapist, pedophile cops, and that would fill up our show every week. And then, somebody else could take over, all the other police brutality that goes on. We could probably break it down by category in every show, who we could do, fill up months and months. So
we're going to be doing a 3-hour show.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to say about this LVMPD officer that's got the lewdness charges, he is on paid leave right now. So
Otherwise,
he's
known
still
as paid
collecting
vacation.
Yeah, he's still collecting a check.
And when they force him to resign, and he still gets all his
Vacation pay and all
his
that.
vacation and his pension and all that, then that'd be a horrible punishment for him.
Yep, and then get rehired at another, somewhere down the road, another state. They'll pick him up and put him right back on the force.
Mm-hmm.
And there was another story. I don't know if you guys covered this last week, because I think it happened before the show last week. But there was a cop that was apparently trained by the LVMPD's Public Information Office, because he was harassing this 12-year-old girl who's been working as media for, I believe, 6 years, and has been, profiled in the New York Times as, a member of the media.
Right.
And telling her that it was illegal for her to put his image on the internet.
Yeah.
Yeah, we posted that one, and then
because apparently the cops get to determine who is or isn't the media.
Right, off some magical government list that they're
She stood her ground, though.
Make up laws. Yeah, that was pretty impressive.
This is good.
We need more 12-year-olds like that.
Yeah, I was gonna pull it up, but you know what?
Absolutely, and a child shall lead them. Much braver than a lot of our local media here, who won't stand.
Not their problem.
Right.
Then there's this story right here. Look at this. Driver dies as cops take him for DUI test instead of hospital.
Yeah, shit, man. This is fucking any one of us who gets rear-ended or into a car accident. Fucking unbelievable. His injuries were fucking substantial. There was broken ribs. Was it punctured lung or liver? Something. He was banged up really, really bad. And they removed him. They had him, an ambulance come, they had him on the stretcher, and the police officer fucking had him removed from the stretcher. He was on his way to the hospital, and the officer intervened and made sure that did not happen and sent him to his death. So...
Which, by the way, they can test for DUI at the hospital. They can run a blood test. They
they can actually do blood instead of any sort of...
Well, they typically do that anytime you're in an accident.
Yeah.
You guys remember this story? The guy who was trying to help the autistic
guy
had his hands up like this, and they shot him.
In his hand.
Right.
Crazy. So that officer is going to go to trial, but we all know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Wow, that was a while ago, finally.
Oh, here, some good news. Utah man shoots and kills Idaho officer who confronted him in his home. So, check this out. Basically, the officer shows up at this guy's house. Police say a man burst into a home uninvited to confront the homeowner about an alleged relationship, was shot and killed by the homeowner. So, this guy bursts in there like, oh, why you with my woman or whatever, and the homeowner shot and killed him. Turns out he was a cop.
Yeah, there was another good article today that I saw. There was an officer who OD'd in a motel room with his girlfriend. They were, he was, I guess, shooting up, and so he was a young officer.
Well, also, I don't remember which city it was, but it was in Florida where they stormed the mayor's house.
Oh, yeah. He was shooting at them. Yeah.
But somehow they didn't manage to murder him.
He was the mayor after all, for God's sakes.
Yeah. I think
Florida is a wonderful place.
Yeah, craziest stories come out of Florida.
Well, that's
to do with the alligators.
We could do a podcast on Florida, to be fair.
Right.
Hell yeah.
I think we'll leave it there. We're at overtime already, but there are some events coming up. The day after tomorrow, we're going to be at the public fact-finding for the murder of Junior Lopez by the LVMPD.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have high hopes for anything constructive coming out of it, but we're going to cover it anyways. And what else? We're going to be sharing a meal at Four Master on Friday, at the Care Complex from 4 to 6. Then we have Food Not Bombs Sunday at Mayfield or Mayfair
Park.
Mayfair
yeah.
Park.
As well as Pet Food Not Bombs going. If you got, you need nail trims or just need some extra pet food to keep you going, you're always welcome to go down there. So you don't have to take your food and split it up. Like you could get yourself a full meal.
So to be clear,
and
you're clipping people's nails down there?
Yeah, for the pets. Yeah.
Pets.
We're always, if pedicurists want to come down, we've had people giving haircuts until the police threatened them. They were giving haircuts and beard trims to the folks that, couldn't afford them. And the police threatened them.
Threatened to have their licenses revoked is what actually happened.
Right. And,
Wow.
yeah, stop that.
Because all those lazy homeless people that were getting haircuts and stuff so that they could be presentable to go to a job appearance.
Right.
Job
God
interview.
forbid that they could ever,
Yeah, that's crazy. All right, I think that'll do it. Next week, we got a very special show for you. We're going to have Bliss from the Ariba Workers Center coming to talk about an ongoing problem with the LVMPD and their cooperation with ICE. And we have some interviews that we're conducting and some pre-recorded interviews that we'll play for you guys next week as well.
Yeah, it should be pretty interesting if you want to see how bad things have been becoming. Mm-hmm. And the oppressive police, it's like an occupying force at this point.
Yeah, it's like Nazi Germany. They're, abducting and disappearing Jews. Now it's undocumented folks here in the valley over traffic citations, not using a turn signal or not having your license, and they'll bring somebody who's trained and collaborating with ICE. They'll bring them, book them, and then just completely disappear them out of the system.
It's going to be a good show. I mean, we have a lot of really good stuff going to be coming
and
up.
they're violating people's constitutional rights, which the Constitution applies to everyone, not just people in this country.
Right.
Yeah, you don't have to be a citizen.
They're actually human rights.
Yeah.
When people complain or make a claim about that, they rapidly deport them so that their claims can't be,
right.
Can't be heard.
Now, do we have we have shirts that are available. Unfortunately, it does cost to do these shows, and none of us get salaries. We all volunteer our time to get the word out there, but we do try to raise some funds, and T-shirts is one of those ways. We'd really appreciate if you would come and support us by getting a T-shirt or making a donation, just so you could keep hearing our content. Trust me, we're not buying our second Mercedes or our second villa somewhere.
Still working on our first Mercedes.
Right. Yeah, it's just, we always need a little bit of help just to keep things rolling. And so it's up to viewers like you to make sure that this content still keeps getting out there.
You.
So
Exactly.
I don't think we have a link yet on the website, but you can just send us a message on the Facebook page that you'd like a shirt, and we can mail one out to you.
Absolutely, folks, please.
Also, we're on Patreon, patreon.com/ACAB radio.
And this is the way they look, the front. There's
Oh,
a backside too.
Yep, they're double-sided, lovely graphics,
The
lovely,
Simpsons
wonderful
cop
graphics.
is on the back.
Yep,
And you can get press passes also.
yep.
Yeah.
We have a lot
Not
of good
that
stuff.
Metro recognizes, the press.
No,
All right, thank you all for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week.
right, bye.